an opportunity to celebrate, learn, and forge deeper connections. Virtually, I encourage you to actively participate in the engaging discussions, presentations that we have meticulously curated. Our speakers and experts are well renowned in their respective fields, poised to offer insights that will challenge your perceptions, broaden your horizons, and spark conversations that transcend boundaries. I extend my deepest gratitude to our partners and the entire SAHRA team who have worked tirelessly to make this webinar a reality. Your dedication and support have been instrumental in bringing us together on this virtual platform. Thank you for being a part of this remarkable journey. Let's make these 4 days an unforgettable chapter in the Africa's heritage. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words, CEO. I really appreciate them. We also have our chairperson, Dr. Yanda. I see he has joined us. He'd like to.
Yeah, good morning, colleagues. Apologies for joining late. CEO, this was not in my diary. That's why I missed the time. It looks like I was meant to be a guest like everybody else. Well, I would like to greet the entire heritage community of South Africa gathered here. As the chairperson of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, I extend a warm welcome on behalf of SAHRA's Accounting Authority, which is made up of my fellow council members, the SAHRA executive management, SAHRA employees, and as well as all our guests and colleagues in heritage. Welcome to this, the third SAHRA Heritage Seminar Week. This occasion holds a special place in the calendar of SAHRA because it invites us to celebrate the rich tapestry of our nation's history, cultures, and traditions. This year, at a national scale, all South Africans are called to join together in celebrating our cultural diversity in a democratic South Africa. But we must also insist and ensure that we are able all the time to locate heritage at the center of our activities, because this is what, at the end of the day, will define us as a country which has got that rich heritage and rich history. We're celebrating our diversity, and therefore let me wish each and every one of you a wonderful Heritage Month. May it be a time of reflection, as I mentioned, learning and unity as we come together to honor our collective heritage and the diversity that makes South Africa exceptional. We are gathering, I understand, some in person, some virtually, but I mean, the series has entrenched itself in the calendar of heritage, and we believe it's a testament to our commitment to adapt and connect even during challenging times. We believe that the seminar series also offers that means to reflect on the series of the past, but also on our achievements and discuss and learn from one another the importance of heritage conservation and celebration in the changing world in which we live. Well, we are facing a democracy that is in motion. Our lives can be fast-paced, and we might always have to reflect back and think in building action. And it is the month of heritage that our responsibility of the heritage conservation for generations. Now, through heritage celebrations, our shared history is in fostering our sense of belonging South African state. Now, I have to mention that besides this being in that telling the South African 30 years of celebrating democracy. And I would like the heritage fraternity community especially this month, and think of what will be made, both by the department, by has played. So I'd like to wish the series continue to learn from one another and appreciate. Wish everyone all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. We just have some slight network connectivity issue. Heritage is about nation building, and that we're here to really adapt to what's happening and to connect virtually. So thank you very much for those warm words. We'll now be hearing from the HRM executive at SAHRA, Ms. Mamakomore.
Can you
Yes.
thank the chairperson of the SAHRA Council days will really be successful. SAHRA has taken how we can continuously improve this series, and we have looked some of our next really looked at topics within which we can engage, look at the sustainable, and there you will be honored with a presentation in heritage, but also tomorrow you will be engaging, so to speak, to understand heritage. Of this, we will be looking at development, conservation, and how better we bodies we provided the administration to heritage that is owned by the communities, and engage and see how the practitioners. And on Thursday of heritage conservation, what are some of the subjects to engage with in compliance? We can improve because we know we do not do this work alone. It is within this week in terms of how we can better And with those, I'd like to welcome everybody, as my chairperson has already done. And I wish you all a fruitful week in engagements. And we must always remember that purest of contribution for us to improve. Thank you. Thank you, CEO and the SAHRA team.
Thank you very much, Kumi, for the last welcome for this Heritage Week webinar series. I just want to remind everybody of just some basic housekeeping rules. Please just remember to mute yourselves when you join the presentation and to keep your video turned off. We will also just be adding a link in the chat, just to remind everybody to fill in the registration form. On our end, it just helps us keep track of who is attending and what we're doing right and wrong potentially. Our next presentation is only starting at 10:30, and we have some connectivity issues here, so we're just quickly going to work on fixing that by 10:30. But thank you very much. So just sit tight, and at 10:30 we'll resume with our first presentation. Sorry, I think we just cut off there right at the end. I just want to remind everybody that we will be returning to the presentations at 10:30. So just in about 3 minutes' time. We just have some network connectivity issues on our end that we're just trying to sort out. So just bear with us, and thank you very much.
Atop Salvokop Hill, in the heart of South Africa's Gauteng province, lies a place of memory, recognition, and deliverance, where the shackles of the past yield to the hard-won freedoms of the future. Freedom Park is a complex of interpretive displays and meditative spaces dedicated to life and tenacity that made this country's to the long possible. For close on 2 decades to experience the heritage and history of South Africa through a very special lens. Here, tribute is paid to the indomitable human spirit. From the beginning of time, the peoples of Africa have struggled adversity, but hope and humanity have often prevailed. That is the proud message that is heard in all the features of Freedom Park. The indoor Kapo Museum takes the visitor into the space of South Africa's collective dreams and nightmares, on a journey through 7 epochs presented in stories, objects, artifacts, graphics, and sounds. In the first epoch, called Earth, African conception of cosmic and human origins is explored through a mix of science and storytelling. In the second epoch, we interrogate the concept of ancestors, starting with the earliest hominids and ending with the recently departed. Here we recognize the spiritual practices and ceremonies that have lasted through the ages and remember how our forebears laid the foundations of our many and varied spiritual cultures. The peopling of our continent and country is traced in the third epoch, From the ancient origins of our species to the more recent migrations of the people who make up our modern demographic mix, Peopling brings our story.
Welcome back. We hope that you can see us and hear us a little bit better now. Our network issues are hopefully resolved. Our very first presenter, an internal person who is Philip Hine, our APM, or Archaeology, Paleontology, and Meteorites Unit Manager. And he'll be presenting, I believe, a research paper on Mikey's, if I'm not mistaken. But he will inform us of all that right now. So over to you, Philip. Thank you very much.
Is represented by the
Thank you, everyone. I do apologize. I seem to have lost a little bit of network connection. If you could just let me know if I'm audible and if you can see my presentation.
You are audible. You are audible. You are audible. You are audible. You are audible.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, guests and colleagues. I'm going to be doing a presentation on Mikey's River Conservation project. Just an update on the work that we've started since 2022 on it is on Plettenberg Bay. I won't be able to provide a full 30-minute presentation at this stage. The work is still ongoing, but a fuller presentation and a more technical breakdown will be provided at the SAHRA next year by the service providers and by the team that's doing most of the work. The second slide. Just in terms of the second slide, I'd just like to acknowledge some of the donors and some of the supporters of this particular project, because I think that is quite important. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Leakey Foundation, who provided the initial sponsorship and funding for this work during the 1990s. I would also like to thank Open Heritage, in particular, my apologies, in particular Nick Wiltshire and Jenna Levin. Specifically, also, I would like to thank Dr. Jenny Deacon for her support in this particular project, as well as the initiator who started the work with the National Monuments. Thank Heritage Western Cape for providing us with a permit, as well as the landowners, both the previous current landowners of Mikey's River, and also the many volunteers and the local labor involved with this project. It was quite hard work, as you'll see throughout this presentation. So I would like to thank the volunteers and everyone involved with labor in particular for this project. I would also like to thank Dr. Will Arthur from the National Museum Bloemfontein, who assisted with this particular project and the work last year. In particular because the National Museum Bloemfontein is the curating institution that houses most of the collections from Mikey's River. Just on the site location, Mikey is situated on portion 4 of the farm Arts Rock in the Pito local municipality, and that is quite close to Plettenberg Bay, in particular the Robert Peninsula. It is at this particular stage a provincial heritage site since 2000. Previously, it was a national monument. It's got a mind of its own, the presentation. You can see in terms of the map on the one side, sort of the map with the South African, the insert of the specific insert or the closer to the site. There's multiple other important sites close to Mikey's River Rock Shelter, both Nelson Bay Cave and Hoffman's Cave, as well as some other sites along the coastline in the Southern Cape. Nelson Bay Cave and Hoffman Cave in particular is quite important, and specifically for the research that's been done at those sites. And those two sites you can actually see from Marcus River, at least the Robert Peninsula. Just a bit of background in terms of Marcus River. So it was declared a national in October 9. With the enactment of the new legislation, the NHRA, it became in 2000, and this means large quantity of deposit prone to erosion. As you can see from the entire back wall of the river of this excavated site that's been so that's the entire back wall. The site is also known for a very large number, totaling 100. And the finds were all curated by the National Museum Bloemfontein. Work was done through the state, the National Museum Bloemfontein. The initial work that was done in the 19 was an effort to promote previously neglected heritage. And so the National Monument Council, Dr. Jenny Deacon, obtained funding to stay that was impacted by the early excavation. And this funding was provided by the Leakey Fund. As part of, as by Dr. Jenny in the 1990s in the National Monuments, then there would be the later stage as more fun. And that's stabilization. We've then secured for that to take place, but at stage where we do, and hopefully will be done by. This is just a information panel that's at my. You can see the site is visited quite regularly. It is open to the public. A little bit about how you can access the site, just a bit probably in the next slide, but you can see people do write on the panel, and this just provides you found at the site, as well sort of a stratigraphic information about heading and the dating. You can see the site has got a deposit about 12,000 years, 3,000 years ago. In terms of site accessibility, now, to note that parking area, it is only available. So there's two ways to. Is via the beach, and it's about a 1 kilometer walk, and then there's the forest path. During high tide, it is and the path, which is suitable for people with this. So to be able to access the site, it needs to be done at a later stage to formalize that and to see which way. There is some to make so heritage route. Basin work has been done. This is of the sorry. Slide showing photographs of the access route. The first is with a boardwalk goes to the area of Gumus. So for a little bit before you can walk section deep, and you need to, and quite rainy weather to be able to get to the path, and from a little bit of a hike, but it's not suitable for people with long in 17 didn't actually include the meters there. I just said long and 75 meters in length, 10 meters. So you can imagine that is quite deposit, and it's one of the large sites. The erosion was stabilized filled with create a retaining wall with then painted with this line. To work was meant to have taken place during the early 2000s. However, that didn't take place for various reasons. And then we around, however, we 22. Just an example was done in the 19 that's used and how it is so. You can also sense the deposit in work. Sorry. So this is just a this image is just a sort of a more side plan indicating the areas where it requires stabilization. Report that was done in the 1990s that provided us with the detail of how we needed to work. As I mentioned, the permit was obtained in September of 2021, and this could really just to stabilize the sections that were not stabilized in the earlier. It was also wire fence, and then sand down and paint the boardwalk. Members were myself from SAHRA, Dr. Janet Deacon, which is the consulting archaeologist, and then it was also Open Heritage, Nick Walter, and Jenna Levin. And this work and how we were going to implement this was based on the engineering report, the Malice and Duplessis report. There were two options. So two options was to use a geofabric like that was done in the 1990s, or a more long-term conservation project that was using Loffelstein blocks, which would provide a more of a permanent solution. During conversations and the consultations between various stakeholders, we decided that with the Loffelstein solution. This, however, did mean that there were some challenges that we were going to face with getting the Loffelstein blocks to the site. The specific option that we used for the kg Loffelstein block, and we needed about 1,080 of these blocks to be to stabilize the remaining deposit. And this posed quite a number of challenges of how we needed to get the Loffelstein blocks to the site, taking into consideration that we couldn't use a bakkie or a truck on the beach. And the site is only accessible via during the low tide. And it was also not possible to move the blocks via the forest path. I will talk a little bit about how we managed to get the blocks to the site. Walls and the use of loffles. These are most manufacture these blocks. Ones that circulating around one of a cave. Just an image of how this is the finished product currently looks like. with the lawful sign using the lawful sign blocks site stabilize lawful sign block squareness of the experience the environment counter. This is just an image of Nick Wiltshire from Open Heritage with the as I mentioned, these blocks had to be ferried to the site from the not be carried and use a truck. So Nick, it would to be able to load and then transport it or and carting out about 2 or 8 blocks that we need it and and a central location on the beach. As you can see, there's the blocks would be loaded on there. I mean, from it could be for the solution. So put it. These just images to the as you can see, packed images one them clear load upon layer the it was decided that a bit of sieving in frames of the so we did not put the sites bags and as the experience tides high over the last 2 days not spared this particular situation. At least one of the days high tide, we lost quite a few of the blocks to the ocean. And this is just the next day after on where we sort of clear the beach to ensure it is presentable and that we don't leave any blocks behind. I'm sure there's still a couple of blocks in the ocean that wash up every now and again. In the sort of conservation work, quite unexpected. The tide came through quite fast. Time to save all the blocks. But I think the team did a tremendous job in cleaning the beach. These are some of the images that shows you what blocks were installed. Just, as you can see, it's quite a high wall that's installed. And you can see the peel next to the stratigraphic profile. These are installation looks like.
To see my name.
This is further images of what it looks like after the installation. And there's some more images of the full sign blocks. So what we did once we installed the blocks, we also then deposit to some of the still needs to be done. So this is at the T junction of the site, and some of the nursery sandbags that's eroding work still. Bit of a meeting. The work still required. Top-down view of there's quite a I believe just in terms of information panel that get to the site. At this particular stage, we're looking for funding to update the panel. Since it is a needs to be language policies also. Here's some funding and update of the signage. But we hope we'll update the signage. This river forms part of, and this is a Western Cape government. There are many sites that's part of this. As you can see, indicated actually talk to Western Cape governments. It's been near plate. So for anyone looking at this particular map, I hope they don't end up in Oudtshoorn, whatever, because a little bit off. But as part of the cradle of human culture, and it is a wonderful site to visit, and I think it's quite an enjoyable. Taking some visitors to the site. In the meantime, we've had some criticisms into Holstein. Because unfortunately, with the Loffelstein solution, while observation and longevity of the site, it does, but it's solution to fix. Forward, we as well as was the best solution identified getting specific site. And just before some of the other boardwalk would need to be sanded down, but that's complete that. Boardwalk, maybe 1 or 2 planks, some replacement, but when we can get better, can then up require. And that was my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. It was really interesting to hear what you had to say about what you're doing at Mikey's River at the moment and sort of where that project is going. I'm also interested in finding out what's happened to some of the maritime and underwater cultural heritage sites with the swell that we had over this weekend. So I'm expecting a few phone calls coming in later today. I see we have 2 questions in the chat already. I'm just going to direct those to you, Philip, if you don't mind answering them. The first one from Larry is, how does funding for conservation get lost? I think maybe just explain your wording in terms of what kind of happened with the funding for the project.
My apologies. I mean, I think that was not the correct phrasing to use. We earlier this year, we sorry. So earlier this year, we did have some funding, not funding through SAHRA, but funding through another organization. However, through cost containment, we couldn't, at this stage, government cost containment, we couldn't make use of that funding for the signage project. So that's how we, couldn't use that funding. But we're hoping to get it back sometime next year. There was another question. Sorry, I think I hope I have answered your question.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you've answered the question very well there. Larry has replied in the chat. I see there is one more question from Leo Mile, just asking if there's sort of an update on the state of the site after the free tidal wave from the past weekend. So yeah, just sort of an update over what's happened. I think you alluded a bit to it already. So
Yeah, I think in terms of the tidal wave, I don't think it would be an issue for the site itself. I think accessing the site would have been difficult. I think that would have been a no-go. So it would have been very difficult to be able to access the site. Also in terms of the Mikey's River there, and the estuary. So that it is quite a dangerous estuary in itself. But I think the site is quite high up. It's quite elevated. So I think there would not be any concerns there. I didn't actually think of that. So thank you for asking that question. I could actually see if I can get an update if there's been any damages or it changed the environment slightly. But yeah, I didn't actually think of that. So that's a good question for me to think about.
okay, perfect. I don't see any other questions or hands at the moment, and we are actually out of time. So I just want to thank you very much for that presentation, Philip. It was interesting to hear about the conservation work that's been happening in Mikey's Riverside. We're actually going to move on with our program now. And yeah, just thank you so much, Philip, and we'll see you later today. We're now moving on to the director, one of the founding directors of PGS Heritage, Wouter Fourie. He's actually joining us from Mozambique, if I'm not mistaken, and he'll be presenting on research-based heritage management and specifically about this case for the development-led research initiatives that he's running. So, Wouter, if you are with us, you're more than welcome to just start sharing your presentation, unmute yourself, and get your presentation on the way. Thank you very much.
Apologies, everybody. Good morning. Let me just quickly try and get this back on. Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate the fact that us as consultants also can give a bit of feedback on heritage management, especially in the month of September. We were asked to just give a sort of our thoughts and comments around the management of heritage resources and how development and developers can assist with providing input into research, and just not from a perspective of damaging heritage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at today, speak about what heritage is, just maybe sort of a primer into where the whole week goes, what can go wrong, how do we protect our national heritage, is the estate, and then just quickly looking at the cycle of a project and what we aim for, and then mitigation and research and how the two can work together with development, and finally looking at two examples. So if we look at just heritage as a whole, and we usually look at tangible and intangible heritage from an archaeological point of view. We do most of our work is more focused on the tangible side of heritage, and that's buildings and structures, archaeological sites, settlements, paleontology, burial grounds, and then moving into the intangible side is oral traditions, stories, performance arts, social practices, rituals. And a lot of these are the tangible and the intangible side of heritage are very much intermingled and very much attached to each other. Now, unfortunately, when we look at development and the impact on heritage resources, we always mostly see the bad side of what developers and developments can do to heritage. I think a major example is the Juukan Gorge incident in Australia. Excuse me, where a major archaeological and heritage site for the local Aboriginal communities was destroyed by mining. There's a major outcry about that, and the impacts from obviously destroying the site was major, but the feedback from from communities and social media was immense, and the impact on the company itself resonated for quite a few, at least 2 years afterwards, with a lot of people having to vacate their positions because of just not thinking about what was happening. And the investigation around it just showed that a company like this, like Rio Tinto, was aware of what was going on, and still they proceeded in continuing what they were planning. So if we look at the South African context, our national estate heritage resources are protected by a robust set of legislation. Obviously, the first is our National Heritage Resources Act, working together with the National Environmental Act, as well as the Minerals Petroleum Development Act. All of these work together to guide development and guide the management of heritage resources during development, pre-development, during and after development. Now, what I really want to focus on is how the National Heritage Resources Act, and specifically Section 38, works, can work if it's implemented correctly through the whole process from the start of an EIA, from the planning perspective, right from the start. And if we look at a development, any development that is planned in the early stages, the requirements for a environmental impact assessment, being it a full environmental impact assessment or just a basic assessment. The aims from a heritage perspective is to identify all heritage resources that would be impacted by that specific development, and that's why we do a heritage impact assessment. And through that heritage impact assessment, we work together with heritage authorities, interested and affected parties, environmental professionals, as well as the client, the developer, in identifying heritage resources and proposing mitigation measures for those environmental for those heritage resources. That whole management plan goes into an environmental management plan. And the idea of that management plan is to say, what do we do with regards to heritage resources pre-construction, during the operational phase of the project. If you look at general is the importance of when we get to this the heritage management plan in the environmental management plan, to focus on how that project manages the impacts. The only way of doing that really is to make sure that the client, the developer, knows what type of heritage resources there are, what their significance is, and of mitigation done. Together with that, there's a component and it has to do with intangible heritage, communities linked to archaeological sites, burial grounds and graves, and then working together with the government to make sure that this whole process is implemented in a transparent way. So important side of this whole development and how is the inclusivity side of it, especially with communities. And this is where the research part of it really starts, is when we're busy with the HRA side, is to make sure that we gather possible information about the communities and their linkage to the area. A lot of this work is done on grassroots and incorporating also the wishes and of the communities and they on what to do with that heritage resource and how it can be promoted or bettered for, as well as for the betterment of the communities themselves. So what we need to do from our side as heritage professionals is to make sure that we integrate our work with the environmental process. We need to make sure that the recommendations that we make is incorporated into the management plan for the development. And also we need to make sure that everybody understands clearly what the message is we want to convey with that. So I'm going to move now over to when it comes to the process of mitigation. And what we mean by mitigation is that's any case where there's a heritage resource where we need to make manage that resource with regards to its significance and how it would be impacted by a project, either directly or indirectly. So with the mitigation side of it, and a major component is, and especially when we start looking at permit applications, is stipulating exactly what type of research we want to do as part of the mitigation. What's the aim of that? And it's always looking at a systematic process of documenting the heritage and getting a comprehensive understanding of the historic period that we're working with, and a detailed recording of everything that would be impacted, damaged, or destroyed, or as part of a larger management plan that would be incorporated into the development. And this is where we speak about a preservation by record. That means we collect as much as possible data on a project for the current research we're busy with, or in the case of further research by other researchers, that data is available and constructed in a way that it's easily accessible by anybody that needs to do further research on it. Also important for us is to have a specific aims and objectives when we do the mitigation work. At some stage later on, it might be that some other researchers would like to do research on a specific point on the site, and that's why we need to make sure that the data we collect is conserved and kept in an ordered manner. The research also, as research topics change over time, the research agendas also help us to focus what we need to do for the mitigation and collection of data. So 2 projects that we worked on in the last few years, well, that was very much based on the collection of data with regards to the project, as well as doing some research on it. But a major component is to have make that data available for further research by other researchers. And the first one is the Clan William project that we completed between 2014 and 2017. And now Clan William Dam was first constructed in 1935 and saw in the 60s another raising of the dam wall. And with each of these constructions, a larger portion of the inundation area, enlarged. And every time there was impact on cultural heritage. The first 2 raising of the dam walls, there was not a lot of research done on the archaeology and the history of the area. And with the starting of the project, we focused on a few research topics. The first one is documentation of the landscape, looking at how the landscape would change over time with the inundation of the dam and through seasons. Documenting specific viewpoints on the Old Cape route, on the new N7 as well. So have that as a data set that can be used by anybody that wants to do cultural landscape analysis and research in the future. We further excavated and documented a total of 27 archaeological sites, a lot of them, the bulk of them being associated with the later Stone Age. On this one, this site was a multi-component site with LSA as well as a large rock painting mural. Also incorporated in this was 2 of the rock art sites. We did the relocation of the physical panels. Before relocation, we did 3D scanning of each of these sites to be able to do a walkthrough, create a walkthrough of the site, as well as create a view of the landscape from the site towards the dam. This is an example of a 3D scan of the one site where the panel was removed. This is also a 3D scan. Left top is the actual photo and left bottom as then we the relocation. The larger panel weighed in the region of about 3 tons. We utilized the services of demolition experts that used wire cutting technology for the relocation of the block itself. Then finally, we were able to do a lot of historical research where we documented old structures that was previously demolished in the footprint of the dam basin. And we were able to collect photos from members and families that stayed in those properties and link those photos up with views of the actual documentation of the footprints of the ruins as we found them. So this for this project, we were able to document the spectrum from the latest Stone Age right through to colonial period and early 1900s, and incorporate oral histories with the sites documented, and this data is then collated and available for further research by other researchers. The documentation and material is currently housed partly at IZICO and partly with PGS. The next project is the Lesotho Highlands project. It's not South African based, but from a Southern African perspective, we expanded the research potential or the research that was done for a development in this project. It's much larger than the Clan William project. We documented and excavated, I think, about 27 archaeological sites. A lot of documentation. This was probably the first time documentation and research on intangible heritage was done on such a large scale in Southern Africa. And firstly, we were able to, with working with the local communities, document intangible heritage resources. We were fortunate enough to be allowed to document initiation lodges and initiation processes, documented protective stones for villages, the stories around that, as well as hours and hours of video footage of interviews with local community members, documenting the history of specifically of each village, and as well as, because this is a large-scale dam project, looking at spiritual healers and the sacred pools where they do their various rituals. We also incorporated with this community engagement, sharing information with local schools, showing them what archaeology is, bringing this to the fore, and enabling a younger generation to see what archaeology and heritage resources is all about. Then from a just from an excavation perspective, the area where we did the research had minimal archaeological research previously done. The thought was that the Lesotho Highlands and the higher highlands didn't have any archaeology or was very sparse. And through this excavations and mitigation work, we could show that the opportunity for further research is immense in that area. Most of these sites are overhang sites, shelters. Just some of the material showing pendants, that shows between the Lesotho and Lesotho Islands and the coastal areas. Some of the other material that we recovered include pressure flake points, bone points, and all this material that was retrieved provides the opportunity for research as a whole to expand the history of the Lesotho Islands and the Kingdom of Lesotho as a whole. So at the end, the outcomes that we always aim for with research is data generation. Because of the size of these projects, we don't really always get a chance to publish the information in academic publications. Most of the documentation is grey literature. But the data that we collect and the material that we collect is always available for other researchers. We aim to do on-site training for junior archaeologists in these large-scale projects, adding to the research potential and their experience further in their careers. And then job creation for local communities is a major component of these large-scale projects. I think, in conclusion, just to show that our research or mitigation work and developers can add to the knowledge and of cultural heritage resources in an area, and it's not always just as some would say destroying the heritage, but it's adding to the knowledge that we previously wouldn't have had in a specific area or for a specific type of heritage resource. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, Wouter. I've definitely learned a lot about some of the bigger projects that PGS has been involved in, and I'm sure that we'll also have some interesting questions coming up from that. So if you have any questions for Wouter at the moment about his presentation, please pop them through in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll direct them to Wouter. I see that we already have one from Natasha here, Wouter. Natasha has asked, how many postgrad projects have resulted in these excavations? So how many postgrad projects have actually come to fruition as a result of these excavations?
So on the Lesotho Islands project at this stage, we know of three postgrad studies that's ongoing at the moment. Further to that, some of our, maybe give a background on some of the researchers that worked with us, or junior researchers. On the Lesotho Islands project, we had 4 junior archaeologists that started with us, most of them with an honours degree. All of them have moved on now to start with master's degrees and PhDs in South Africa and overseas. And I think that's part of the aim of this, is to nurture that nurture the younger generation of archaeologists to get them to stay in archaeology. And there's a lot of other researchers out there that's in the wings looking at working with these data sets.
Thanks, Wouter. I think you answered that quite well. I see Natasha has just asked, in addition to that, just research papers as well. Have there been research paper outputs and how many that's been?
So the research papers specifically on the Lesotho Islands project is one introductory paper that has been published. At this stage, there's 2 separate research papers on smoking pipes as well as pottery that's in the making, and then there is planning for a volume, published volume on the whole project in the next year.
Okay, thank you, Wouter. I think you've answered Natasha's questions. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I actually have one if you don't mind. I'm quite interested. You mentioned that you documented a lot of intangible cultural heritage elements with the Lesotho project. I'm just curious, how do you actually document that? You mentioned some footage of interviews. Do you have some social anthropologists on the team? I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the intangible heritage documentation, our partners in that was the Maricha Museum in Lesotho, and what they did was they spent, I think it's in the region of 9 months in the field, doing interviews, sitting down with elders, sitting down with local village community members. That documentation is video or audio. And so we also documented walkthroughs of these villages, the villages that would be inundated at the end. So to present those, we would most probably at the end have a interpretive type setup where you could do a walkthrough in a village, click on a certain place, listen to an interview from an elder or somebody that provides some information on a specific aspect. So that's the idea around it. But most of it is there's a large research component that they did, but I think the bulk of it was video interviews and structured interviews.
Okay, that sounds great and very interesting. I'm curious to see how that's come to fruition. I'm really interested in it. But I see we actually have a hand in the chat as well. Pallav Kumar, if you would unmute your mic, please, and just ask your question to Voted.
Thank you very much. It was really very wonderful presentation on that aspect. I have written that in the chat box, but I think that question doesn't appear. I have written that do we also have the ancient mortar or something like mortar or bricks, as we do research at CPUT on material characterizations of various eras materials. So presently our work, which I have just highlighted in the chat box, we did for Castle of Good Hope and Robben Island. And we are very much closely collaborated with the University of Granada. And yes, of course, SAHRA is one of our very valuable partners. So I'm just wondering, for Claim Valiant, I saw that you have excavated and then you got some of the old things. So I'm just asking that, do you share those materials with us in order to characterize them? What type of things do they use during that time? Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure if you'd like to jump in with that, please.
Yeah, I think. I mean, at the end, when we present the data and the material to the repository, the museum or the university, it's up to them at that stage for people then to access that data, either through an agreement, research agreement with that entity. But our work basically ends where we deliver the final product and the data to either to the client as well as then the repository that's responsible for curation.
Great. Wouter, just to confirm there, which museum would that material then be with if Pallav wants to pursue that research in the future?
That would be with the Iziko Museum. I know there's still some material that between us need to go that side, but that would be Iziko at the end. Specifically for the Western.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Wouter. Yeah, that was a great presentation, and thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got quite a busy schedule with what you're doing at the moment, but it's great to hear some of the projects that you're involved with, and just to see, how like you said, this development-led research initiatives can come together. So really excited to see what comes out of all those future archaeologists coming into the field that PGS is now training. We're now going to move on to the next presentation, and our presenter, who have now become presenters, are joining us in person today. So we have Mia Strand and Nina Rivers from the One Ocean Hub. They will be presenting on equitable ocean management processes, and specifically this idea that sort of what marine cultural heritage plays in that role. So I'm just going to hand over to them and they'll take it away for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ron. And thank you for having us today. It's very exciting to present here at the Heritage Week event. We're gonna start with just looking a little bit into some of the research that we've been doing and some of the marine cultural heritage that's emerging from this research. And then we will look at some of the implications of that and how we can ensure that the emphasis on marine cultural heritage can advance more equitable ocean management. So like Ron said, my name is Mia Strand and I'm a PhD candidate for Nelson Mandela University. And we are also researchers with the One Ocean Hub. So just a little bit about context first. So the research that we've been doing forms part of two bigger research projects. One is looking at marine spatial planning in Algoa Bay. So the specific research has been working with 24 co-researchers in the Bay. And we also worked in the context of Utakela Marine Protected Area, which lies between Durban and Richards Bay in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's two quite different contexts, one in the Eastern Cape of South Africa and one in KwaZulu-Natal further north. And in both contexts, we've been looking at an overarching social ecological systems approach, which is the mouthful, but really looking at the interconnectedness between people's social connections to and social relations with the ocean and coast, and the dynamics of the ocean and the environment and ecosystem, and how they are inextricably interconnected and interlinked. And we're looking at how local communities know or connect with the ocean and coast. So very often we find that overarching ocean governance or conservation approaches really look at the ecological side of things and not necessarily looking into local communities' knowledges and connections with the ocean and coast. So here's just a picture from our research, co-researcher Tyrone Swartboy from Algoa Bay, where you can see at dawn. So just a little bit about the research methods process. So this has been a long-standing process which has taken over a year, where we've been working very closely with Indigenous and local communities. So at the beginning, we have done initial workshops and engagements with people identifying as Indigenous or local communities that have an interest in how the ocean is being managed and conserved. We've also used photography and storytelling, where we've been going to places of people's importance for people to share their own stories, record their stories, take pictures, and really spend time where they have a connection to the ocean and coast. And finally, we've been looking at the analysis of these photo stories. So how are these areas important to people, and how can they be managed, or how can people's knowledge better inform how we make decisions about the ocean and coast? So when we've been looking at all the combinations of the pictures and the stories, we've also identified different themes. And here's a picture of a participatory mapping process, where we actually put out the map and draw out where do people use the coast for different things, and where do people go for different engagements with the ocean and coast. So yeah, you're welcome to read more about that. We published a couple of papers just mentioned at the bottom here in terms of the specific process in Algoa Bay. So I just want to give you a little bit of results, because that's what's exciting, and some of the photo stories that actually came out of this research. It is also important to mention that we have virtual exhibitions available freely online on the One Ocean Hub YouTube channel. So you're more than welcome to go and check out the full virtual exhibition there. But I just want to highlight a couple of stories. So here is from our co-researcher, John Sane from Mandeni, who says, "I'm a fisherman. The sea gives me life because I'm able to fish what we cook at home for food. All my pictures relate to fishing because my life is based on fishing." Here is Paramount Chief William Human sharing that, "I've been camping near Marine Drive since birth. Every year we used to come to the sea. I grew up at the sea. My heritage is here, and I have a spiritual connection with this area." And behind them, you can actually see the fish traps, which are by Cape Recife in Algoa Bay. Here's co-researcher Kristen Manstaden, who says, I feel like I escaped into my own world. I like being in my own bubble and in my own space, and being in the ocean just lets me be in that space even more. Here's Nkosinati Mkisa, who's from Webede community, saying, by the ocean we collect herbs, roots, and harvest washed up animals for traditional medicine and healing. And finally, here is Siasanga Ntabeni, who's Sangoma in Algoa Bay, and sharing that we respect the sea a lot because we believe it is where our ancestors lived and continue to live. This is our place of serenity and our prayer altar. So what these stories show is that marine cultural heritage is diverse, is plural, is numerous, it's multidimensional and overlapping. People rely on the ocean and coast for their identities, for their cultural heritage, spiritual connections, recreational uses, both physical and mental well-being. We find that a lot of the marine cultural heritage stories and connections and knowledges that emerge are dynamic and adaptive. They depend on the context in which people are, but sometimes it's not context dependent at all. So we find that some places like this rock, and this is a picture from co-researcher Hasseline Mambukt, is this specific rock was important for spiritual healing for some Khoisan representatives, whilst for others, the whole ocean is important for the home of the ancestors, for example. So marine cultural heritage context is also abstract. Like it's been mentioned before today, marine cultural heritage or cultural heritage can be intangible and tangible. Sometimes it's connected to a specific physical thing or place, like I said, and sometimes it's within stories or within identities or within how people feel when they're by the ocean. But what came out so strongly is that more or less always it's interconnected with nature. So areas or places or senses and emotions tied to the ocean is interconnected with people's marine cultural heritage. So I just wanted to show this. This is a preliminary map, but this is the map that was co-developed with co-researchers in Algoa Bay. So this will emerge soon in a publication that Nina and I are authoring, but this is where co-researchers came together to theme up the different uses of the ocean and coast and how they map that out on the map. So you can see there's a very few places of the coast that are not important for specific social cultural dimensions, which have here been grouped in quite like big categories of cultural heritage and history, but also learning, where people come to learn and interact with the ocean and coast, for livelihood and subsistence, which we've seen from John's story is also tied to identities and ties to heritage and customary practices. It's also recreational uses, family and fun. It's where people go to feel relieved or feel getting more energy from being by the ocean. And then we have green, which is showing spiritual and or religious connections, where people come for baptisms or religious practices, or just to connect with the ancestors by the ocean side.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Mia, for that. Okay, are we ready? Yeah. Okay, so my name is Nina, and I have been working really closely with Mia. She's actually been, apart from being my wonderful colleague, she's actually been one of my students as well. And she's just worked so hard on this work. And so I really do encourage you to, we will share a link with you, Ruan, to go and look at the virtual exhibitions that came out of this work. So the way that Mia and I have been working is really sort of from a grassroots level, but then also from the top as well, to try and, you know, get this research to actually have some impact. So Mia was working at the level of working with the communities and you know, sort of eliciting their stories about their cultural heritage, and then I was sort of working more at the top with governance authorities. And so we were looking at sort of, okay, well, where to from here? Once we are able to sort of showcase these stories, what do we take from there? So the implications of this, of what Mia has shared with us really is that cultural connections are really diverse, and it shows the significance of marine and coastal areas. And also that current management often results in exclusion and lack of access. So one of the big things that came out of Mia's work was that, you know, a lot of people share stories of not having access to the coast, where they would like to practice their intangible cultural heritage. And then also intangible cultural heritage is largely missing from marine spatial planning and MPAs. We did a little bit of work around looking at, you know, what are some of the elements that are really needing to inform marine spatial planning and MPA plans. And really cultural heritage, and especially intangible cultural heritage, is missing. So that, really needs to be responded to. But also, you know, part of this is because it's quite difficult to map and quantify intangible cultural heritage. And it's, I mean, a lot of people would say it's also quite contentious trying to do that. So, but there is an urgency of recognizing these cultural dimensions. I remember speaking to one of like a coastal manager, and he just said, you know, if it isn't on an Excel sheet or on a map, it doesn't exist. So there is really a lot of urgency to get this knowledge out there in a way that coastal authorities can take it up. Okay, so to that, taking that step forward. So what we did was that when we had these these exhibitions in person, we actually invited, besides the artists themselves who were telling the story, we invited traditional authorities and local knowledge holders, government officials, and conservation authorities, all to come together and engage with the artwork. So it was an amazing time of bringing people together who might not usually interact. And then we had multi-stakeholder exhibition, multi-stakeholder workshops, where we brought all these different stakeholders together around, you know, sort of, we mixed them up, and we tried to have people that don't usually sit together to sit together and brainstorm ideas of pathways to integrate this knowledge, intangible cultural heritage, into ocean governance processes. And this resulted in a policy brief that we published, and it really looked at integrating Indigenous and local knowledge into marine spatial planning. And we can share that with you as well. But today we have looked at that policy brief and then drawn out recommendations which specifically speak to how to better recognize marine cultural heritage. So one of the things is really that to use arts-based methods like Mia did, where it really helps people. It's you co-create knowledge together. It's not just experts coming in or academics or researchers saying, oh, well, this is what I observe, but it's really creating knowledge together with the communities who are the ultimately, hold this knowledge and are the custodians of that. And then also using participatory community mapping processes to inform marine spatial planning. So again, I spoke earlier about how it's really difficult to document this knowledge and then actually take it up and use it in national or regional plans. So a way that we've been sort of doing this, we piloted this participatory community mapping, and it's proven really useful as well and really fun. The co-researchers really enjoyed it, and for them to actually see something tangible that they've created is really rewarding as well. And then also further to this is that we do think that MPA management plans should be co-developed with communities, coastal communities, so their knowledge can really inform these plans. And then to explore opportunities for greater co-management as well of MPAs and marine areas. So an example of this would be that in terms of greater co-management, for example, this would be representation of traditional authorities on marine cultural heritage committees and working groups. Just so people can really have a voice in terms of the decisions that are being made in the areas that they live in. And then more recommendations is to explore the overlaps between conservation and cultural heritage priorities, and then also to designate specific areas for cultural heritage practices and access. And then also to revisit MPA declaration and implementation processes, as well as to expand on the understanding and focus of marine cultural heritage. So to take it beyond physical or archaeological heritage sites, but actually to look at places where people practice cultural heritage, but it's intangible, and so to find a way to recognize those spaces as well. So thank you so much for listening to us today. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much, Ron, for inviting us here.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. I think that was a very interesting presentation, and just seeing the kind of work, I think the timing as well, coming from voters, where he showed us what's happening in terms of the development space with heritage impact assessments, and going into really the intangible cultural heritage and how we see a lot of that's kind of lacking in that space. So it was actually great to hear him saying that some of that work happened with a recent project in Lesotho, but it's also fantastic to see researchers on the side really showing this is how it could be improved, specifically in coastal communities. So thank you so much for presenting. Yeah, I'll just check the chat quick if we have any questions at the moment. So I see people are praising the presentation.
Yay.
And okay, Lisa mentioned that the map showing the different intangible cultural heritage spatial claims really highlights how important it is for consultants doing HIAs for coastal projects to record and make recommendations to mitigate the negative impacts of developments on these intangible practices. Definitely, I think we've, as sort of in the MUTCH unit specifically, and I was sort of speaking with Lisa, we're the ones that kind of deal with those developments below the high water mark. And we've often seen if heritage impact assessments don't specifically mention space being used by communities, it's not technically a heritage resource as defined in our Act. So that's sort of a gap that we really need to try and address. If you cannot make some kind of spatial claim for it, where does it fit into the legislation framework? So yeah, very interesting stuff. I see Queenie said, thanks for the presentation and insight on cultural heritage being inclusive of local communities. Yeah. I think everybody just enjoyed that presentation. It was really interesting to see what's being done out there.
Thank you.
I think I actually also want to just find out. So I sit on the Marine Spatial Planning National Working Group, as both know, and I deal with a lot of the sort of national level management when it comes to this stuff. And we've really been trying to brainstorm how can we consider intangible cultural heritage when we're planning on such a large scale. And it seems to me what you're suggesting is it's going to work fantastic for sort of the regional or local scales like Algoa Bay. But how do you foresee that going on the sort of the national scale? What kind of zoning do you see happening for intangible cultural heritage to just ensure that we're actually conserving it and making sure that it's being taken care of?
That's a big question. And I would love to have the perfect answer to that. But I do think that there's a lot of places to start, and that there's a lot of opportunity to utilize research processes or mechanisms already in place. So for example, the research we've done in Utakela up in KZN, we can see that you can actually utilize marine protected area management to also protect and manage marine cultural heritage aspects and intangible cultural heritage. Because a lot of the times, like Nina mentioned, it's not necessarily in conflict with conservation priorities or practices, but actually have a lot of the overlapping priorities. So when people do, connect with the ocean and coast for spiritual or religious purposes, often what is needed or wanted is clean ocean areas and estuaries and beach areas. And so the conservation practice actually, they overlap. So I think one thing is to look at how can we make sure that existing management functions or conservation practices along the whole South African coast actually can take into consideration marine cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage. And a very important aspect there is to ensure access, because a lot of people have been experiencing lack of access to the ocean and coast because of conservation practices or development, economic development, etc. So trying to find ways to make sure that people can still practice their marine cultural heritage. But I do think, with the marine sector plans coming out as well, I think we did provide some inputs on them. But looking at, it is difficult to look at a national perspective because a lot of these heritage practices and connections are contextual and different from place to place. However, I think we need to start somewhere. So trying to find, and I know that there's some work happening at Sandby and other places, looking at, how do we make sure that we, because it's difficult or because it's a lot, we still make a plan and do research to try and map it out as best as possible and make sure that it is represented in decision making, even though it might be on a smaller scale. Because all marine spatial planning can't be on a national, in terms of it's according to the different contexts. So you still need that, both of the sectors again.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add.
Well, just onto that, I mean, and sort of what you've been saying already, Mia, but in terms of, you're talking about scaling it up, really, and which is a really difficult thing because culture is so contextual. And, Mia's seen such a difference from the Eastern Cape to KZN. So I think it would also be for national government to work with the local partners, and see, what are the local researchers doing? What are the NGOs doing? And who's working with local communities already? So I think just to try and keep it at that fine grain. But then, but it's a difficult thing, but it can be done.
Of course, yeah. No, I think you highlighted well the idea of integration between the management authorities and just all spheres of government coming together, and then really not losing that local flavor, literally coming to the ground, working with the people who policies and decisions are going to impact. So, yeah, great answer. I really appreciate that. I see we have a hand up here in the chat. Let me just see who that is. Oh, Lisa. Yes, Lisa, please pop in with your question.
Thanks. I've been really interested in this project, especially the spatial planning aspects of it. It was kind of what initially drew me in. I want to just ask a question about the polygon, a better word, on the map. The various spatial claims that think performative ritual, things like that. How were those derived? Mapping exercise with co-researchers, like with members of the community, and showed you the rates within. And have any advice on how one acts empirically, I suppose, in next to one's question, and that about how do we scale the but more about the process up with these areas. Thank you.
Okay, I think I can at least respond to the first. So we lost you a bit there, Lisa. It was breaking up a bit on the sound, but at least I think you're asking, the first question was, how do you come to those categories and polygons? How do we did that process? And then how could that be scaled up? Is that kind of the question for a more like national marine spatial planning?
I'm sorry, yeah. That is kind of necessarily how do we scale it up? other than Algoa Bay? How did you come up with those poly?
I can start with the process that we did in Algoa Bay and Utukela, because it was quite similar in terms of spending quite a lot of time, because we were using the arts-based methods and really engaging very closely with local community members and people who were co-researchers on this project. So it is important to mention that this map isn't representative in any ways. It is very much what has come out from the specific connections that the co-researchers have and their knowledge of the ocean and coast. But basically what we did was a very long but in-depth process of looking at people's connections and priorities for the ocean and coast and utilizing photography and storytelling. And from all of these many stories and connections, we actually sat together with all the co-researchers and put them into themes. So these themes were developed by the co-researchers themselves in terms of how they thought their knowledges and their connections and activities could be grouped together as quite like broad connections. And then, they were mapped out. But then in Utukela, as will become evident also from our future paper, is that there were different categories. So again, this speaks to the difficulties in terms of a national process, an overarching process. But I still think that if we are able to, so your question, I think, was how do we do this on a broader scale? I think a lot of these mapping processes can be integrated in existing research work and existing engagement with local communities. So I actually think if we have a little bit of training behind using participatory methods, participatory mapping approaches, a lot of people along the coast already engaging very deeply with communities can be able to do this work. And I know that some colleagues of us from the Hub actually already does that in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, and I think some are doing it in the Western Cape as well. So I do think if you then bring all of these maps together in all the different categories, you can actually find a way of sitting together and try and group them together if need be, or you actually keep it at a finer scale, like Nina said, like actually making sure that you keep that fine grain to the different contexts that you're in. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have multiple categories or contextual categories. But yeah, I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit, so I'm not sure I got the whole question, but I'm hoping that responded to some extent.
Lisa, if you just want to jump in just to see if you're satisfied with that answer.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the presentation. We have unfortunately run out of time. I'll just note one more comment that was made in the chat from Queenie, just mentioning that we need to include traditional healers to assist in the management of sacred sites, etc. And yes, I love this idea of sort of co-researchers. It's the word that you used, where you kind of give agency to the person whose heritage is, or cultural heritage is being taken care of, that they're really involved in that process, and it's not just a one-sided affair. So I really like that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming through and giving this presentation.
Thank you so much.
It was really interesting. And I think Lisa also just wants to thank you quickly there in the chat, if you can see that. But yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we now have unfortunately run out of time for this slot as well. And we will be moving on to our next presentation. I think Jonathan Balls, I think I've seen him in the chat, so he should be available. And he actually has the next hour with us. And he has two different presentations that he'll be talking about. The one is about the beach shipwreck at Cape Padrone. And yes, Jonathan, you're more than welcome to take it away if you are with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Great stuff. Oh, which one are we going to do now? PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. Is it afternoon already? Good afternoon. Like Ruan said, you'll probably have me for the next hour or so. I'm going to talk a bit about identifying the Cape Breton shipwreck. This was a beach shipwreck, and there's quite a few ships. Oh, why are you playing automatically now? Yeah. Okay, let's start. Okay. What are the significance of shipwrecks? Shipwrecks are a valuable historical resource that contribute information about how people lived in the past. They provide insight into technology used and the socioeconomic and cultural aspects of a specific period in time. Further, shipwreck artifacts can establish a more reliable chronology of an artifact type compared to its land counterpart, assist in understanding the context of artifacts better. The reason for this is it's a one-time event where you have on land more like events happening on each other. Shipwreck happens once, and you can look at the artifacts that way. To fully achieve this, however, shipwrecks need to be dated and their identity and cultural context established. The identification of wrecks why are you doing this? My thing is getting a bit crazy. Sorry about that. It's just the identification of wrecks of unknown origin relies on a combination of documentary and material cultural evidence. Okay. How do we identify shipwrecks? Shipwrecks are very rarely identified by direct evidence, such as artifacts, for example, a bell with the ship's name engraved on it. The vast majority of shipwrecks are identified by circumstantial evidence, including a combination of historical sources, locations, artifacts, and ship construction. This was the same for the identification of the beach wreck at Cape Breton. Only the location and some physical attributes of the wreck was known. Location and physical attributes will play an important role in identifying vessels that wreck in this area. Okay, and now I want to talk a bit about the wreck site. The Cape Breton site location is near the shoreline, concealed beneath coastal sands between the Woody Cape and Cape Breton, which is in the Eastern Cape, South Africa. It falls between the Sunday River mouth and the Kariga River mouth. Okay. Due to the heavy storms that occurred along the Eastern Cape coast during 18th to 19th August 2020, tons of sand were displaced near Cannon Rocks along the Woody Cape coastline. This displacement of sand exposed the beach shipwreck at Cape Breton. The East London Museum was notified about the wreck being exposed, and principal natural scientist Kevin Cole of the museum went out to investigate. Physical examination of the wreck. Firstly, measurements were taken from the frame or ribbing, the wooden side beams of the hull, and the cross beams. Further photographs were taken for record keeping and to assist with the interpretation of hull geometry. The wreck measured in length about 70 meters, and the notable features were a wooden frame with iron supports and some bronze pins. This is important because this is a representation of a composite build. Okay, crap, where the hell did this thing go now? The research commenced by referencing ships and salvage in South Africa by M. Turner, which catalogs vessels that were wrecked in the region spanning from the mouth of the Sundays River to the Kariga River, which includes the precise location of the focal wreck site. Additionally, the Maritime and Underwater Cultural Unit generally provided access to their comprehensive shipwreck database within the required parameters. By using these two sources of information, I created 3 separate lists. Ships in the Cape Breton area on both the Much list and in Turner's. Second list was the ships from Cape Breton in Turner only, and the third was ships in the Cape Breton area on the Much list only. The reasoning for this is to establish why some ships were missing on each of the lists. Some of the reasons were due to different parameters and more up-to-date locations added. Following these lists, more resources were located to confirm or cast doubt on each of the ship's locations. This research yielded 15 possible wreck sites between Sunday River and that of the Kariga River area. Okay. This refinement process entailed the establishment of more precise wrecking locations and a comprehensive analysis of the physical characteristics of 15 candidate wrecks in comparison to the actual wreck sites. What followed was to reduce the number of potential candidate wrecks. I think I lost connection. Wait. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I think I lost connection there for a bit. What followed was to reduce the number of potential candidate wreck sites. To do this, each candidate wreck location had to be confirmed through other sources, as well as a comprehensive analysis of the physical characteristics of each candidate wreck, compared to the physical attributes of the Cape Padrone wreck. For example, if a vessel had a solid iron frame, it would not fit into a wooden frame discovered. Okay. Based on the information gathered thus far, an exclusion criteria was formed. If vessels had known coordinates that does not align with the Cape Padrone wreck site, they were excluded. Ships with uncertain GPS coordinates, but additional factors such as vessel's historical date and construction differs from that of the physical attributes of the Cape Padrone wreck site, were also excluded. Following this application, we were left with only 6 remaining. Why do you keep on doing this? Remaining contention. On your left-hand side, you'll see our Google Maps show how the ship wreck gets open and closed due to winds and sand. 2010, 2017, 2019. But we had to reduce the criteria even more to get less ships. To reduce the number of candidate wrecks further, the location of Grootvlei Beach had to be located, as some of the historical sources named this beach as the wrecking location. Unfortunately, the location of the Grootvlei Beach could not be found on any map. With the aid of historical sources and locals, the location has been established. An interesting mention by one of the historical sources is that a large pond of rainwater forms in the area and that due to long droughts it dries up. These Google Map images to the left shows that the period of a pond that's present and does dry up as well. Why did you do this? Okay. Eliminating the last few wrecks. The following criteria was used to further narrow down the wreck identification. Was the vessel wrecked at Grootvlei? This is important as Cape Padrone wreck site was known in the past as Grootvlei Beach. Was the ship constructed between 1850 and 1870? This is the date of composite built ships, and the Cape Padrone wreck is a composite build. Was the length of the ship around 70 meters? After applying these criteria, we were left with 2 ships. Okay. It can be argued that the Cape Padrone wreck site might be the site of an unknown vessel, but as can be seen from the news articles, all the ships that wrecked in the Cape Padrone area were either witnessed and reported on, or survivors lived and gave their accounts of what happened. Based on the available information, it is my conclusion that the wreck located at Cape Padrone is likely that of the Gladiator. My rationale behind this assertion stems from several key pieces of circumstantial evidence. Firstly, news articles have pinpointed the wreck's location and the details surrounding the ship's construction and length, closely align with what we've observed at the site. When examining the evidence for the alternative wreck option, it mainly relies on a solitary database entry without any corroborating evidence. To bolster the case for the Gladiator or rule it out, a permit would be required from SAHRA to collect samples of wood and, if possible, the sheet metal from the hull. This will be used to compare against what is on record. Okay, thank you for your time. That was quite fast. So open for questions, and we can talk about questions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for the presentation on the beach shipwreck and how you sort of came to that conclusion. That was very interesting to hear. I'm sure, yeah, we have quite a few maritime archaeologists or maritime enthusiasts in the chat today. So I just want to see if there are any questions at the moment. I don't see any questions right now on that, but some more might pop up. I know that you actually have the second presentation, which is meant to start at 12:30 on the technical conservation work. If you're feeling comfortable with it, Jonathan, would you mind actually presenting on that so long? And then maybe while people formulate questions on the first presentation, we could maybe do sort of a joint question session at the end of both your presentations. Jonathan, so just bear with us for a little bit while he comes back. But I think, yeah, Lisa just highlighted in the chat, it is sort of we sit with a lot of challenges when we're trying to identify wrecks. Working in the MUTCH unit, it really is difficult sometimes because you're sitting with a database, and often you'll see, for example, as Jonathan mentioned, you'll have a Grootvlei beach, which doesn't exist on any map today. So we then have to really research and try and dive into like Jonathan and seeing how he's going to contribute to the field going forward. I just want to see if Jonathan's back yet. It seems we've lost Jonathan. So what I'm going to recommend, because we've actually had the presentations quite on top of each other, we're just going to pop to a quick 5-minute, or let's say a 7-minute break, get back at 12:20. We have a few videos lined up that we usually circulate during this time that our marketing team will just run. So we'll continue with Jonathan's second presentation, hopefully at 12:20. So I know it's a bit cold in some parts of the country, so feel free to just quickly go and grab maybe a coffee or a hot drink or something like a tea, whatever suits you best. And then we'll just continue with the presentations at 12:20. So thank you very much. And then, yes, I'll just connect with Jonathan and see how that goes. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry.
Jonathan, we're just going to pop to a quick break. And then at 12:20, we'll just continue with your second presentation, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected, it seems.
No worries. That's perfectly fine. Yeah. So
are there any questions? Or?
At the moment, there aren't any. So what we'll do is we'll ask questions right at the end of your second presentation. I actually have some questions. I just want to write them down. And then, yeah, we can just do that at the end. So, yeah, just at 12:20, we'll continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Atop Salvokop Hill, in the heart of South Africa's Gauteng province, lies a place of memory, recognition, and deliverance, where the shackles of the past yield to the hard-won freedoms of the future. Freedom Park is a complex of interpretive displays and meditative spaces dedicated to the long history of courage, sacrifice, and tenacity that made this country's democracy possible. The park has welcomed citizens and visitors for close on 2 decades to experience the heritage and history of South Africa through a very special lens. Here, tribute is paid to the indomitable human spirit. From the beginning of time, the peoples of Africa have struggled adversity, but hope and humanity have often prevailed. That is the proud message that is heard in all the features of Freedom Park. The indoor Kapo Museum takes the visitor into the space of South Africa's collective dreams and nightmares, on a journey through 7 epochs presented in stories, objects, artifacts, graphics, and sounds. In the first epoch, called Earth, the African conception of cosmic and human origins is explored through a mix of science and storytelling. In the second epoch, we interrogate the concept of ancestors, starting with the earliest hominids and ending with the recently departed. Here we recognize the spiritual practices and ceremonies that have lasted through the ages and remember how our forebears laid the foundations of our many and varied spiritual cultures. The peopling of our continent and country is traced in the third epoch, from the ancient origins of our species to the more recent migrations of the people who make up our modern demographic mix. Peopling brings our story into the modern era. Resistance and colonization shows the struggles of indigenous peoples against successive waves of colonization and how oppression, segregation, and exploitation impacted on their way of life. The social and economic harms that resulted from colonial industrialization, especially the large-scale exploitation of mineral resources, are poignantly experienced in the epoch called industrialization and urbanization. The concept of labor in this epoch is represented by the trappings of mining, farming, garment industries, unions, and domestic work. Nationalism takes us forward into the recent battles for autonomy, equality, and democracy. In this space, we witnessed the birth of the new South Africa, an inclusive, unified, democratic nation. Inclusive and exclusive nationalisms are explored, as are the various arms of the struggle against apartheid. Finally, the epoch of nation building and continent building takes our dream forward, from the advent of our constitutional democracy into the future. Freed of the tyrannies of the past, our people move into the new millennium with hope and determination. In the open air is Freedom Park's Garden of Remembrance, with its spaces of meditation and gathering. Isivivane is the spiritual resting place of those who played a role in the liberation of South Africa. The Lesaka, with boulders from the different provinces, welcomes the visitor in remembrance of those who made the ultimate sacrifice. The Lekgotla is a place of gathering with a central tree and honors the age-old tradition of African communities to meet under a canopy of branches. Skumbuto is the park's main memorial and bears testimony to the nation's fallen heroes in the 8 wars fought through the ages that shaped the current geopolitical landscape of modern South Africa. It is towered over by hundreds of symbolic reeds that express the nation's rebirth. The Wall of Names, of which there are 450,000, commemorates those who stood for liberty and lost their lives. These names may seem innumerable, but they represent only a few of the fallen in the many wars fought through the ages on South African soil. The Gallery of Leaders recognizes that our battles for freedom were not fought alone. We were supported by leaders and champions from across the globe. The gallery honors national, continental, and international political players whose contributions to our freedom are considered exceptional. Whether it be a hushed moment in the quiet sanctuary where you commune with your departed loved ones, a veneration of our nation's heroes in Isivivane, or a view of the grand eternal flame surrounded by water that best expresses your mood, all offer a reflection on the great gifts bequeathed by the departed, who are not forgotten. Freedom Park, a place of reflection, learning, and celebration.
Okay, I hope everybody got themselves a hot drink or took a quick little bathroom break while we were away. So Jonathan, I just spoke to him on the phone. He said he's just having some connectivity issues at the moment. And he has actually sent through some videos for us just in case this would happen. So what we're going to actually do now is play a pre-recorded version of his presentation. So he sent through the video, we'll just watch that. And then he said he'll definitely still be able to connect to the chat via his phone, for example, so you can still field some questions, but unfortunately he cannot present live. So yeah, we'll just run through the presentation, which will be a video, And then Jonathan said he's ready to answer questions. So please just have your questions prepped for the end. And yes, I hope you enjoyed the presentation that Jonathan's prepped for us by video. Thank you.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining me. My name is Jonathan Bolt and I will be giving a presentation on conservation in the East London Museum. A museum conservator is a trained professional responsible for the preservation, restoration and maintenance of natural heritage objects within a museum's collection. The primary goal of a conservator is to ensure the long-term stability, aesthetic integrity and the cultural significance of these objects, allowing them to be studied, exhibited and enjoyed by present and future generations. To become a museum conservator, you need to obtain a bachelor's degree in a relevant field of study, such as art history, archaeology, chemistry, or a related discipline. Then you will have to pursue presentation in the East
Where
is a trained professional responsible for the preservation, restoration, and maintenance of tangible heritage objects within a museum. Good afternoon and thank you for joining me. My name is Jonathan Bolt and I will be giving a presentation on conservation in the East London Museum. A museum conservator is a trained professional responsible for the preservation, restoration and maintenance of tangible heritage objects within a museum's collection. The primary goal of a conservator is to ensure the long-term stability, aesthetic integrity and the cultural significance of these objects, allowing them to be studied, exhibited and enjoyed by present and future generations. To become a museum conservator, you need to obtain a bachelor's degree in a relevant field of study, such as art history, archaeology, chemistry, or a related discipline. Then you will have to pursue a postgraduate degree with focus on conservation. You'll also have to start looking for internships and volunteer opportunities at museums, galleries, or conservation labs. This hands-on experience is crucial for developing practical skills and networking in the field. Conservation and restoration are two different approaches when it comes to the care and management of tangible heritage resources. The slides that follow will explain the differences. I will first start with conservation. The primary objective of conservation is to maintain the existing state of a heritage resource, preserving its original condition and character as much as possible. The emphasis is on preventing further deterioration and protecting the resource from damage or loss. The focus is on preventative measures such as controlling environmental conditions to slow down degradation, implementing proper storage and handling practices, and using reversible and non-invasive treatments when necessary. The result of conservation is that the resource remains largely unchanged from its original state, with the signs of age and wear retained as part of the historical or cultural value. The goal is not to make the resource look new, but to ensure its longevity. An example of the conservation method in the context of historical building might involve regular maintenance, protective coatings, and careful climate control to prevent structural damage and maintain the building's historical integrity. Or if you take a look at the left-hand side with the shipwreck nails, they have been cleaned and sealed to prevent oxygen from reacting with them. The slides to follow will now discuss the restoration method. Restoration aims to return a heritage resource to a specific earlier state or appearance. This is often a state that is considered its most significant or historically accurate condition. The goal is to reverse the effects of aging, damage, or decay and make the heritage resource look as close to the original state as possible. Restoration typically involves more extensive and invasive interventions compared to conservation. This includes repairs, reconstruction, and the replacement of deteriorated or missing elements. It may require research and documentation to accurately recreate the missing or damaged parts. The results of a restoration object looks as it did at a specific point in time, often with the removal of later alterations or additions. This can mean that some elements may entirely be replaced or reconstructed, and the resource may lose some signs of age and wear. For example, in art conservation, restoration might involve cleaning and repairing a damaged painting, which could involve removing previous restoration attempts and filling in areas of loss to restore the original appearance of the artwork. So to summarize, conservation focuses on maintaining the existing state of a heritage resource and preventing further deterioration, while restoration aims to return the heritage resource to a specific earlier state or appearance, often through more invasive interventions. The choice between these two approaches depends on the cultural, historical, or scientific value of the heritage resource and the goals of the conservation or restoration project. The slides to follow will relate to the conservation practices at the East London Museum. The humanities side of the museum rarely actively collect heritage objects anymore. We mainly accept donations. When a new object is given to the museum, it gets documented and a temporary number is assigned to it. If there is no clear sign of pest activity, the object is placed in the observation room for a few weeks. This follows with an acquisitions meeting to decide what happens to the object. If the object is added to the museum, it then goes to the conservation department for relevant treatment and packaging. Last part of the object's journey is the collections department for final storage location. The conservator's role at our museum mainly focuses on preventative conservation methods. This is the procedure and policies relating to proper care and handling of museum objects to prevent further degradation and damage. The following slides will cover aspects of preventative conservation. All heritage objects should have a detailed record of condition, history, and treatment done to it. The information is invaluable for tracking changes over time and making informed decisions about conservation and restoration efforts. Conservation assessment is done periodically to assess and evaluate the condition of objects. This can help identify potential issues before they become severe and inform decision about necessary interventions. Careful handling and transportation is critical to prevent physical damage. Handlers should be trained in the proper techniques and use appropriate gloves. For example, when an object is moved from point A to B, plan ahead. Is all the doors open and the path clear of any obstructions? Do you need assistance with moving the object? Proper storage is essential for preventing physical damage and environmental exposure. Objects should be stored in a clean, stable, and well-ventilated environment. Make use of archival grade quality storage materials such as acid-free paper, boxes, and folders. This protects items from contaminants and deterioration. Continuously monitor and maintain the environmental conditions in storage and exhibition areas to prevent degradation. Environmental conditions relate to temperature and relative humidity. Extremes in temperature and humidity can lead to expansions and contractions of materials, causing structural damage. Minimize exposure to direct sunlight and artificial light sources. Use UV filtering glazing or curtains to reduce the damaging effects of light on sensitive materials. Excessive light exposure can result in chemical reactions, fading, and deterioration of pigments and materials. Develop appropriate cleaning protocols for objects, but exercise caution to avoid damage. Use gentle, non-invasive methods and materials suitable for the object-specific type and condition. Implement security measures to prevent theft, vandalism, or accidental damage. Surveillance systems, access control, and restricted access to collections can help safeguard valuable objects. Regular inspections and pest control measures are essential to protect objects from insects, rodents, and other types of pests that can cause irreparable damage to objects. Try and use a non-toxic method and avoid harmful pesticides that could further harm the object. Thank you for your time regarding this quick presentation of conservation at the East London Museum.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that was an easy way to actually see that presentation now. Apologies again, just from Jonathan's side, for not being able to present that to us live. But yeah, that was a very interesting presentation just to see how the East London Museum kind of treats their stepwise process when it comes to receiving donations and conserving them. I think, yeah, it was very interesting. And yeah, I think I just saw in the chat somebody say it's a useful toolkit to have in your arsenal. And yes, Motors Ben, yeah, it really is. I'll now move on to just sort of the question session for Jonathan. As far as I'm aware, I think he is back in the chat now. Yes, I can see him. So yeah, if anybody might have a question, please either post it in the chat or just raise your hand, and then we'll just refer to you in that order. And if I don't see anybody, I might actually raise my own hand and ask a question. Larry has just asked that, are all donations useful? Do you conserve everything that you receive? Jonathan, over to you.
Not. What we usually do, that's part of the meeting. If an object is in line with our collection policy and we do require it or we don't have it in our collection, then we'll go to the next step of conserving it. Usually when we do not accept an item, we contact the person again, see what we want to do. Some people take it back, other people tell us just to donate it to someone else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Larry, I hope that answers your question. And then I actually want to jump back to your first presentation, if that's okay with you. The hardship, is that what you're calling it? So I'm quite curious. I guess sort of a two-parter. Firstly, there's obviously been quite a strong swell on the southern coast over the weekend. And like I said, I'm quite curious to see what's going to wash up or wash open over the next few days and all the reports that we'll be receiving. But do you have plans to actually go back to the ship to see perhaps, what this recent swell has done to it? And then also sort of leading into that, the sort of long-term plan. Do you have any other ideas there? Do you want to continue investigating the gladiator? Well, you seem to be the gladiator. Do you have other sort of methods you want to try pursue in the future, perhaps? Just sort of what's your research plan there going forward?
The idea we have at the moment, or the running idea, is maybe to start documenting all the ships in the East London area to confirm their locations and take research from there. Usually what we do at the museum, we just wait till someone reports something, because we're quite a small complement staff, and I don't think my director would like me going out daily to the beach. So the idea is to eventually, if we have a complete list of ships, and then you can grade them from what is in danger and what's not in danger. Like the Gladiator for now, it most likely did open again, because it usually only opens with these types of winds. And so yeah, luckily it's on a part of the beach where people don't usually go, so it should be fine for now.
Just in terms of sort of your future research then with it, do you have any other plans with that wreck or wreckage, and any kind of methods? Nothing for now. Okay, no worries. That's perfect.
Nothing for now.
Okay. And then, yeah, I see we have some more questions in the chat. Leomila has just asked you, so jumping onto your second presentation now, Does the museum offer training or knowledge exchange with other institutions?
Well, the short answer is yes. I'm a firm believer of sharing knowledge. We don't offer official training, but you can contact me anytime or our department, and we will assist where we can. We do this for other institutes as well. There's been 2 other museums we kind of liaise with on certain projects. So yes, always. If you want my contact details, I'll send it through.
Okay, Lumile, you heard what he said there. And then I see Larry has asked a question again. Who decides on the inclusion criteria for an institution's collections?
Yeah, this is part of a museum's collection management policy. Your national museums will have a more inclusive collection policy than our provincially aided museums. So we'll focus more on Eastern Cape related things, or better even East London focus, because we're located in East London. But we do the whole Eastern Cape side.
Usually the museum works
with the rural 3. You have 1 on display, you have 1 in storage, and you want to have 1 as backup.
No, that's great. Sorry, Larry, I didn't mean to call you out there. It's great that you're asking questions. I just meant again, Larry just had a follow-up, which is interesting to see. But yeah, okay, that's fantastic. And just sort of from our side, are there currently plans with East London to get their collections on the soon-to-launch SARS 2.0? How is that project scope looking?
Well, we're currently working with the
What do you call it? Vernon system. So there should be an ability to just incorporate the Vernon system's information to the SAHRA system. I was speaking because I'm busy with doing a shipwreck database this side, and that's going to definitely go onto the SAHRA system. So maybe in the long run, yeah, Vernon can be also incorporated.
Great, yeah. No, we're always ready to receive data on heritage and incorporate as best we can into the South African Heritage Resources Information System. I'm just going to give it another minute. If there are any other questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, I'll kind of end the session a little bit early today. But in the meantime, we'll just wait if any other questions pop through. I just want to take some time to just briefly thank our marketing team, who none of you are actually seeing, but they're behind the scenes running the show, coming up with solutions to the technical difficulties that we're having, and really just doing an absolutely fantastic job in terms of setup with the sound, the video, the audio, everything. So I just really want to extend a big thank you to them. Obviously also just to Ben, who is sort of overseeing this week. It's always great to have him leading this process and bringing together all of this stuff. So I just want to take a quick moment to just thank them, because I feel like they kind of go behind the radar when it comes to getting thanked for these things. But I don't see any other questions at the moment. So then, yeah, I think we can kind of end today's session a little bit earlier. So yes, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your presentations. And we'll definitely chat, because I think going forward, we have quite a few projects that will overlap when it comes to maritime stuff. But yes, thank you for your presentations and just for making a plan with those videos in case something happened. It really helped. So thank you.
Ruan, thanks. Ruan?
Yes, Ben.
It's Ben. Before you conclude, I just want to invite all of our guests online to please switch on your microphones. So you have not heard me incorrectly. Please switch on your microphones. Please switch your microphone. And I would like you to give a big round of applause to all our presenters and our wonderful program director for a fantastic job today.
Thank you very much, Ben. But yeah, I think it really goes out to the presenters today, because we've had some really interesting presentations today. Starting obviously with the introduction from SAHRA's chairperson, SAHRA's CEO, our HRM exec. It was great to just have that sort of warm welcome and transition into why we're actually running this week. Yeah, we had the presentation on, how a site is being conserved by Philip. We then had a voter talking about how developments are really sort of leading this thing about research going into archaeology and heritage management, which is great. It was also fantastic to have Mia and Nina come through to show us the sort of intangible heritage side of what we deal with, and really see the impact that heritage management can have on the ground with people. And then obviously, yeah, Jonathan coming through at the end there with something on the other side, the conservation of sort of the beach shipwreck. How was it identified? How he came to that conclusion, and then just seeing the the very sort of stepwise technical approach as to what happens at museums when it comes to technical conservation. So really, yeah, a great day, and I really hope that that everybody enjoyed today. But like I said, it's not the only day. So please join us for the rest of the week. The programs are online. And if you haven't yet, please fill in the registration form. It helps us out a lot. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that you will join us on another day this week. Thank you.
Deep in the South African interior lies a dramatic landscape strewn with the secrets of our past. For almost a century, scientists have been probing the depths of these caves for clues to the genesis of our species. Called the cradle of humankind, this National Heritage Site was declared a World Heritage Site in 1999. A land dotted with springs, streaked with rivulets, and pocked with caves, the Western Highveld of Gauteng is a region unlike any other. Temperatures here range from freezing cold to scorching hot, and the broiling clouds of thunderstorms are a frequent sight in the summer months. The flora here is well adapted to extremes. As a fire climax grassland, these plant species rely on regular burnings, which are an integral part of their life cycle. The land is home to many species of wildlife. The rocky outcrops and shady sinkholes are haunts for animals large and small. For millions of years, they have lived and died here, their bodies sinking back into the earth. But for some, their final resting place has been immortalized. The dolomitic limestone caves of the region are a perfect environment for organic matter to fossilize. Millions of years ago, our ancient hominin ancestors also walked these lands, and some of their dead lay in its caves, their fragmentary remains preserved through the ages. Here, 15 particular sites of paleontological significance have produced a wealth of fossilized material. Now, what scientists are discovering is adding new chapters to the human story. The fossilized flora and fauna found in most of the caves shed light on the world of these early hominins. The remains of certain species, like rodents, can tell scientists a lot about the environment in which they lived. And the finding of hominin fossils and other animals in the same archaeological context provides important insights into what life was like for our pre-human ancestors. Taung and Sterkfontein